Hello and welcome to Wardens of the Cross. This is the Defender. The New Covenant, founded by the coming of Jesus Christ, is not exactly what some believe or claim it is. There are those who believe that the New Covenant, taught about in the New Testament, makes all of the teachings of the Old Covenant, taught about in the New Testament, both obsolete and meaningless. This is, however, not true. This episode will use biblical proof and logic to look at how the New Covenant is rather a crowning glory to the Old Testament, rather than a complete overwriting of the previous teachings of God. The Old Covenant was the first and the initial covenant made between God and his chosen people, with those being the Jews at the time. We can see the Old Covenant established and created all throughout the Old Testament, with the beginning of its revelation being found in Genesis 9:13, when God created the rainbow to serve as a mark of his promise to his people. This revelation of the Old Covenant was continued all throughout the books of the Old Testament, with the intention and the promise of God to send a Messiah to his people in the future. Some of the teachings of the Old Covenant do differ from the New Testament, but this is because Jesus was sent to perfect the Old Covenant by teaching mankind through mercy and forgiveness rather than wrath. Jesus taught and solidified the new and final covenant through his coming to earth. Prior to Jesus' coming, the Old Covenant had been incomplete. This is due to the fact that a Messiah, a Savior, had been promised to mankind to reopen the gates of heaven, as we are told in the book of Psalms, as well as many other places throughout the Bible. Without the coming of Jesus, the Old Covenant would not have been completed, and so mankind would not have been saved as of yet. Jesus is the New Covenant. He is a perfection of it, which is why some of his teachings overwrite those from the past. The teachings of the Old Covenant and New Covenant have some conflicts which are visible in many places. One of these examples is within the Old Covenant, when the Jews were told that they could not eat any unclean meat, such as that from a pig. In the New Covenant, we are told that no food is unclean, and meat from a pig may be eaten. This apparent contradiction is not actually a contradiction at all. The Jewish religion, initially founded by God, had different teachings which were overwritten with the perfection and completion of the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant was never going to be complete until the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And, after it was complete, the New Covenant was created out of the Old Covenant. Much of what was taught in the Old Covenant is still within the New Covenant, but it is perfected so as to last until Judgment Day. The Old Covenant, rather than being obsolete and no longer valid, now exists within the framework of the New Covenant, which was established by the Messiah, as the true and perfected covenant between God and man, and it will last until Judgment Day, as Jesus has told us. As a last and final argument to show how the Old Covenant is not obsolete, we can look at the book of Matthew 5:17 and see that Jesus tells us that he has not come to abolish the law, but to perfect it. He has come to save his people.